Assalamu alaikum. So in this video I will be speaking about my revert story. Basically, I was born Jewish to a Jewish family and I converted to Islam in 2018. So I get asked a lot of how I converted to Islam, of course, as most reverts get this question. So in this video I'll get into it. So, as I mentioned, I was born to a Jewish family. I was born in Montreal, Canada, to actually a Hasidic family. So, up until I was 3 or 4 years old, up until my parents' divorce, I was raised Hasidic. And afterwards, once my parents got divorced, my mother took me and my siblings out of the Hasidic community, but we still remained Jewish, of course, and we still remained in the Jewish community. And my mother was actually born in occupied Palestine, or as Jewish people call it, Israel. So to start, I guess, how it all began. So I went to a Jewish school my whole life, obviously up until the end of high school. So at that point, I was super Jewish, believed in God. I always believed in God, but I believed in Judaism because I had a Jewish education and I held really closely to that. So yeah, it was only until I graduated high school, once I left, the Jewish community, that I started meeting, non-Jewish people. And it all started basically when people would start asking me questions about Judaism, and I would answer them, and sometimes I'd be met with challenges. They would challenge me, but this. I still remember that, and it really stuck with me. And at that point, soon after, I started realizing that a lot of things that Jewish people were doing didn't make sense to me. And I was like, So I started distancing myself away from Judaism. So it kind of started like that. And I started having a bit of doubt in my heart about what I was practicing. And then I basically started distancing myself from God. So I lived like that for a few months. But then at one point I was I feel alienated from God. I feel like I need to become closer to God. I feel like I needed to mend my relationship with God because I was starting to feel, empty without God's presence in my life. So before going to school every day on the bus, I took a little Tehillim, which is a book of Psalms, which is written by the King David. And I started reading that, and I was like, what, hopefully that's going to, ignite my, my passion, my, in Arabic we say my iman, my faith. So I started reading that, and it was really nice. It was a nice book. And I remember one thing in particular that I remember that kept reoccurring was how King David mentioned that, he was prostrating in prayer to God. We prostrate in prayer to you, God. And it was mentioned over and over and over and over again. And that got me curious. So I was like, why don't Jews prostrate during prayer? So I Googled it. I went to Chabad.org, blah, blah, blah. I did a lot of research, spoke to rabbis, but it still did not satisfy me. All the responses I was getting were not satisfactory to me. At that same time, I didn't really have any Muslim friends. I had one Muslim friend, but she wasn't, we never spoke about religion. But I knew some Muslim people online that I would sometimes speak to. And one time I had a whole conversation with it wasn't a friend, it was a Muslim online friend that I never met. Actually, I never really met in real life. But anyways, we had a discussion and we were sending each other videos about religion. And I saw this one video about debates between Muslims and Jews, and I started realizing at that point that Islam and Judaism are so similar. It was also at that point that I realized that Jews and Muslims believe in the same God, and also Christians, but that's not really relevant to the story. But up till now, to this point, I basically thought that Muslims worshipped a different God. They worshipped Allah, which is a different God. I realized that Allah is actually just the name for God in Arabic, just like Dieu is Arabic and French. And I decided to actually start looking to Islam. And also when I was thinking about when I was reading the Tehillim, and I realized that he was saying, well, we prostrate in prayer to God, I did actually think of Muslims. So I was like, okay, that makes sense why Muslims pray to God. And I also remember, how like Muslims pray without their shoes on, and I was like, that makes sense because a mosque is a holy ground. When you pray when you speak to God, you're speaking to someone so holy, so you have to respect them and take off your shoes. And I was like, that makes sense. And it was like little things like this. At this point, I still was not like actually considering being Muslim, but it was little things like that kept being added into like, I kept realizing that I was like, okay, Islam makes sense. This makes sense. Until one point I was like, you know what, I'll read the Quran. And I started reading the Quran, and the Quran made sense. And I was like, like there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfect. But at that point, I still wasn't like fully, convinced like I'm going to change my religion, because I felt like the thing that was holding me back most was honestly, I felt like I'd be abandoning all of my cultures, all of my traditions, everything that I once believed in would be like completely gone, just because, like I'm changing my religion, and my religion was a fundamental part of me, of who I was. And I had a really hard time, drifting, like separating myself from that, and, accepting Islam. But at some point I realized that actually accepting Islam and being Muslim and practicing with Islam would actually make me a better Jew. And I wasn't separating myself from Judaism. It was the same God. I was still being, it was still the same religion as the God of Judaism. So I came to realize that at some point. And it was just over time, like I said, many little things that I learned about Islam that made sense to me, even the modesty and, how the modesty of like, how Muslims dress, it made sense to me. And I'm like, my whole life, modesty made sense to me because I was raised Jewish, and it just all made sense to me. And I can't exactly remember what was the last drop that made me Muslim, but I do remember when I decided basically to become Muslim. It was Ramadan. It was 2017, and I was like, I'm gonna do Ramadan just want to see what it's like, So and I was able to do this, and I was like, I want to fully immerse myself in it, so I'm gonna like pray too. So subhanallah, I actually learned to pray like really quickly. And I remember that I think it's in the Quran, or it says that God made this language easy for you to understand. And I was like, subhanallah, I was able to learn to pray so quick, and I never had even spoken Arabic. So I started praying, and I remember one time I was in bed, I was like, okay, how do you become Muslim? And it said, you just need to repeat this word. It was the shahada, the sentence. So I started on my bed, I was like, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And I said it, and I'm like, am I Muslim now? Like, I feel the same. So technically, I was Muslim since 2017, but I still at that point wasn't like fully like immersed in Islam. Like my heart wasn't fully there, so I don't necessarily consider myself fully Muslim at that point. It was in January. I met this girl online, and anyways, we started talking, and then I told her, like, we started hanging out too. And then at one point I told her, I'm like, you know what, I want to just convert to Islam. I want to do it. I want to fully do it. So it was in January 26, 2018 that I actually converted to Islam. I took my shahada, and that's when I consider myself fully Muslim. And yeah, that was pretty much it, how I went from being Jewish to being Muslim. Thank you so much, and ma salama.